Baccalaureate organization. Ms. Vandana Lulla, Director and Principal, Podar International School. Ms. Rita Wilson, former Chief Executive and Secretary, Council for the Indian School Certificate Examinations. Academic League Developed Schools. Ms. Manjula Pooja Shroff, CEO, Calorx. Thank you so much for everybody being present with us at the session. The session that we're starting off now is International Schools in India, Challenges and Opportunities. International education began in response to the needs of multinational group of students whose expatriate parents had been brought together by diplomacy or trade. International schools provide education for international mindedness. With globalization changing the world, multicultural groups of students have become a norm in many schools. International educators are facing new challenges and new opportunities as globalization metaphorically sinks the distance and the difference between nation states. The session highlights are the challenges that are faced by international school educators as they consider implications of a globalized world, the new teaching methodologies which will highlight the opportunities to make the students the globalized citizens. I would now hand over the mic to Mr. Steve Rudolph, Director, Jiva Education. Mr. Steve Rudolph is an American educator, author, and public speaker based in India. He is the proponent of a novel concept in education called multiple natures, which is a physiological framework which helps in understanding people's natures and personality traits that result in particular behavioral patterns, especially related to learning and work. Mr. Rudolph is the co-founder and educational director of Jiva Institute in Faridabad and conducts life skills workshops and educational lectures for students, parents, and education.
Okay, good evening to everybody, to all the panelists who are here, to all of the die-hard members who have managed to stick it out until the very end. Usually a lot of people come at the beginning when all the big-name speakers come, and then right after lunch it starts to dwindle off, and at the end you find out really who the dedicated educators are, and that is you. So I would like to extend my appreciation to you for all being here until the very end today. And you know, they say that it's only few people who really get the diamonds. Everybody winds up getting artificial jewelry. So you're going to be getting pearls cast in front of you by the members who are on this panel. I know just about all of them, if not directly, indirectly, some of them recently. But we can be sure that the people who are here today are going to provide you with some extremely valuable insights that you'll be able to take back with you and apply in your contexts. And I'm sure that we'll all be co-educating each other. I look forward to hearing a lot from each of you. Before I begin, I just need to mention that we do have a limited amount of time, and we do have an unlimited amount of things to say, each of us, including myself. So a timer is going to pop up there, and I would just request that the speakers do stick to the time frames, because I'm going to be forced to have to thump and remind you, and I don't want to have to do that, but I would be forced to do that in the interest of all the people who are concerned. And I would like to say that sometimes it's better if we leave a little bit of extra time for questions from the audience, because even though you might have a lot of things to say, their questions will be extremely relevant. With that, I will conclude my introduction, and I would like first to begin by introducing Ryan Pinto, who's the CEO of the Ryan Group of Schools. I can say, which needs no introduction, I think each of us has either known, been to, visited, or seen in their neighborhood one of the Ryan Group of Schools. I have, in my own Sector 21B in Faridabad, right down the road from us, is one of the Ryan schools. Ryan is the CEO of the Ryan International Group of Institutions. He is the executive and has executive and management experiences, and is one of India's youngest social entrepreneurs in the K-12 sector. He's grown the organization nationally and internationally to 128 institutions serving more than 2 lakh students. He hopes to transform the traditional schools into dynamic, interactive learning environments that benefit not only students and teachers, but all stakeholders, including community members, cities, the country, and so on. He strongly advocates the use of technological tools to educate each and every child of India, and he was instrumental in the inception of the Ryan Group's international curriculum schools that are called the Ryan Global Schools, and in establishing the group's first overseas school in the UAE. I think for a young gentleman, as young as he is, it's surely an amazing set of accomplishments, and we look forward to hearing what it is that you have to say to us. Ryan, please.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I just want to thank Almighty God for this opportunity and for the organizers of this event, inviting me here to speak. That introduction was really heavy, made me feel really old. But I must say this, that I am the least among here. It's a pleasure being amongst all of the guests up on the stage who I'm co-paneling with, and all of you out there. So I hope to just share a few thoughts that are in my mind, and if you can look at me just as a young person, not just as Ryan, just as a young person representation of the young India. So we're looking at education, and what are the challenges for an international school? Well, you know, firstly, the challenges and opportunities comes from change, and we know that change is inevitable, and basically the only thing that is constant is change. There are several things that, you know, causes change, and change affects us. You know, the recent economic crisis, you look at changes in leadership, political changes, changes in telecommunications, how we connect with each other, and of course, the net and the growing population. So, what does this change bring to us? Everybody's accepted, you know, change is unavoidable. But Peter Drucker says that, you know, like taxes, we try to postpone them, but it's better for us to adapt to the change now. Okay, so let's look at some of the changes in education. There's an increased population, so a lot of the PE guys that have come and met a lot of you would say there's a great demand, there's a great number of children, so there's a great business opportunity, right? Changing role of a teacher. We all have had wonderful teachers in our lives. The role of a teacher is now changing from just being an information silo to being a facilitator. Because today the students have all of the information at their fingertips. Advancement in technology. Today a child of 3 years old, you put the tablet in their hand, they'll be very comfortable with it. You take the same piece of technology, give it to a teacher, she'll be scared of breaking it. So that's the divide. You know, there's an interesting fact that I found. There was a 16-year-old recently in the US that got $1 million for an iPhone app that he developed. I wonder what his computer teacher must be thinking. He must have been all green, either in jealousy, or maybe he must be thinking that he added value to the child, and some of that green is coming his way. But fact is, every generation needs a new revolution. Well, one of the challenges that we all face is a lack of teachers, a lack of resources, lack of personnel. And whether it be international schools, whether it be any school in India today, there is a lack. There is different opportunities for people to go into different careers, and the sad thing is that teaching is going down the priority list of preferred careers. And that is leading to a dearth of quality of teachers, and that is a big challenge for everybody. Because as a school operator, we want good teachers in our classrooms because they are the ones that are interacting with our children. They are the ones that are representing us, and we want that quality to be of highest caliber. But it is a great challenge, and there is no perfect solution for it. This is a concern I share as a young person, that, you know, there's a dilution of moral values and ethics. Today, sad to say, my generation is thinking all about fast money, easy money, want to become a multi-millionaire, multi-billionaire overnight. And that is really sad, because our parents, our previous generation has worked really hard. And this is something that we need to drill into our new generation as they grow up. One of the great things about the change in today is that there is various product offerings in terms of curricula. There will be national and international, and there's an acknowledgement and there is an acceptance. So there is an opportunity, and that's why we all are here in the international curriculum segment. But here's a question that I often ask our own teachers and our own parents and our students, that are you so globally bound that you're of no local use? Why do I say that? a lot of the times you think international curriculum and, wow, I just want to go to the US, I just want to go to the UK, I want to go study abroad. And they think, you know, that the national curriculums are of lower quality or caliber. But is that true? Is there one better than the other? Sorry, I'm bouncing out a little bit. So, responding to change, we need to recognize that we need teachers, but teaching has to be a calling. It's just not a career. Money can't just be a motivator. Here's a fantastic quote. If you hire people just because they can do the job, they'll work for you. They'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they will work for you with blood and sweat and tears. So we need to have the right people with us. Another interesting thing about teachers and in education is about leading and mentoring. How often do we mentor? How often do we build leaders within our own community? Here's another great quote. If each of us hires people who are smaller than we are, we shall become a company of dwarfs. But if each of us hires people who are bigger than we are, we shall become a company of giants. This is a quote I keep referring to our principals and our leaders in our organization, that please don't get too comfortable in your seats, because at some point you need to be mentoring someone else to take on the leadership position. Great thing about international curriculum is that collaboration. And this is a fantastic opportunity where kids today, using technology, are collaborating with kids all across the globe. And this is something that we need to harness. Just my final point in terms of technology. Everybody keeps saying we need technology in the classroom. We need greater pieces of smartboard, tablets, etc. But have we ever stopped and had a thought, what is relevant to our particular classroom? What is relevant to our particular student? But coming back to my point, children are born with technology. It's the teacher that is delivering the teaching. And if they are not using that piece of technology, then it's no point. Given the fact that even today, a paper and a pencil out in the villages of India is still a great piece of technology, great piece of innovation through which teaching is still done. So we need to be relevant, updated, but yes, we need to be relevant to our community. I just want to leave it with this, that India, there's a big task ahead of us, whether it be international schools, whether it be other schools. There are a lot of numbers that keep floating around. This is an old research report that had come out. And there are 100 million children that are not into the education sector. It's a mammoth task. And India is the largest young population ever in the history of mankind. We have close to 500 million young people who are under the age of 25. That is more than all of North America. And that's a huge asset for us as a country. But at the same time, it's a great responsibility, especially for everybody in this room, because we are into education. Because these are the youth that is going to shape the future, that is going to shape the future of our nation. So it's not just we are building global citizens, but we have to be building responsible global citizens. And we have to manage the aspirations of the youth. As there's change, if you change your thoughts, you're going to be changing your world. The task ahead is great. Abraham Lincoln said this wonderful quote during his message to Congress. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. Just talking about the quote, that there are a lot of things that we can learn from the West, a lot of best practices. There are a lot of best practices that we all need to learn from each other, because our situation, our challenges, our opportunities are very new. And we can't just rely on somebody else's solution. We need a solution that is relevant to us, relevant to India, relevant to our situation. All of us are here to discuss with you, to have question and answer sessions, because it's not that there's a simple solution. Martin Luther King, he did not give the "I have a plan" speech. He said, I have a dream. So we all have a wonderful dream to educate the youth of our nation. Though we have challenges, but we are determined to overcome that. So with that, thank you very much for being here, and I welcome questions.
I think probably we do questions at the end, if that's okay. So this way, sometimes there might be three might want to chime in on that. But I want to thank Ryan for a really wonderful presentation on all fronts, visually and intellectually touched a lot of points, and it's great to see not just enthusiasm, but wisdom in such a fine young man. Okay, we're going to, I think we just need to change the computers over, and as we do that, I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Manjula. Okay. Manjula, I've just had the privilege of meeting recently, but we had a very nice chat outside, and I was very excited to hear about the work that she's been doing. She's the CEO of Calorx in Gujarat. And what's so interesting, I think, about her work is that it spans so many different types of learners and learning requirements, everywhere from students who are from underprivileged backgrounds to privileged backgrounds to special needs students. There are over 25 projects that she and her colleagues are working on to help make a difference and in the space of education, and even in the area of teacher training, which she is extremely dedicated to in working with teachers from government schools, I believe it is, I'm sure, from the tribal areas. Okay, that sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm sure she's going to tell us something about that. And I think she represents the educator who is reaching across boundaries and across all socioeconomic strata to really make a difference, because there's not one India, as I've learned being here 20 years, there are many Indias. And so it sounds like you're doing some great work. Let's hear more about it. A round of applause for Manjula.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Dignitaries, I love saying this, dignitaries on and off the dais. Every one of you matter to us, and Steve rightly said, you're the guys who really mean business, because at the end of a long day when you've heard so many speakers, it's not easy to sit through yet another one. Let's see if I can make this as interesting as I can. India is home to nearly 440 million students, school-going children, out of which 1/3 live in abject poverty. Everybody knows the Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. This is the flagship program of the government for universalization of education, elementary education. They're choosing or chasing a big number, like 200 million, put them to schooling. Let's not get lost in the numbers. But let me give you a perspective. Of all the children that go to school, 94% of schools are government schools. So 94% of that tall number that I told you are municipal children. 6% are schools that you and me represent. And even less than that are international schools. In India, international schools have earned a reputation of being elitist. Only those who can afford it, and really afford it, okay? Some of the schooling is really mind-boggling in terms of fees. But you know what? International education, elitist concept, is only new to India. It's not like that the rest of the world. Who says you have to have a big pocket of money, big bucket sitting somewhere to educate internationally, or the concepts of internationalism to your children? But we have a whole bunch of excuses for that. Let me tell you why. Everybody knows PISA, right? PISA put Finland education on the world map in the year 2000. So PISA is basically a skill testing, concept-driven test that lakhs of children age 15 take for reading, math, and science. In the year 2000, Finland topped all the three. Not just the topped all the three, in 2006, because they have the test every 4 years, they repeated that, topped all the three again. And that's when the whole world woke up to, oh my God, what's happening in Finland? And you know how America is, kind of researches everything. They tore Finland education apart. I mean, there is research work, there's CD work, there's all over the place. They splashed Finland. And we in India said, you know what? Finland doesn't have our challenges. It doesn't have the huge population that we have. It doesn't lack infrastructure like we do. Until you know what happened? In 2009, Shanghai tapped everything. What does China have that India doesn't have? It has more population than we have. It has the same pockets of poverty that we have. If Shanghai can do it, why can't we? Why do we live with the excuse that international education is for the rich and affording class? I'm going to leave that thought right there with you, because, and let me go on to the next one. It should work when I say page down. Okay, my bad. Mahatma Gandhi said, if you want to teach real peace and teach against real war, begin with children. Actually, everything begins with children. Everything begins with education. I cannot overemphasize that point. Any country that wants to go to the second level, be it financially, economically, politically, any which way, has to focus on primary education. And Ryan's already said that, you know what, there's no rocket science. So a lot of our speakers are going to be saying similar stuff. So at the cost of repetition, he said exactly the same thing. Are we teaching or facilitating learning? But the good thing is some of us have begun to think alike. Some of us are feeling the real challenge of education and moving in the same direction. Whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, but it's the same direction. So it's going to have an impact. Let me take you to, historically, how do we handle education? There are theories of education, right? So the behavioral theory pretty much is about aping behavior. It's about the math, science drill that you do in your classrooms. The cognitive theory, as you know, is group behavior. The constructivism theory is something that IB does very well, International Baccalaureate. It basically constructs learning from the past. You build on your past learning. But you know what? In 2004, Siemens started to challenge everything and say that all of these theories fall short when you look at learning in the digital age, in the knowledge era, which is so diverse, which is so informal, which is so, it breaks down every barrier. There's no geography in there. And then the theory of connectivism was offered to the education world. It's basically, in a single sentence, learning in the digital age. So this is where our children live. And again, Ryan has already brought that out. This is exactly where our children live. When we were growing up, we didn't live here. We lived in the physical space. Our kids live in the cyber world. And let me quickly run you some interesting slides. If some of you have seen it, I apologize for that. I'm going to tell you, or I'm trying to build a case about why e-learning is so critical in the digital age. Let's look at how learning has evolved. Listening to music in previous times used to be on the left side of the slide. Right now, in front of a screen. Watching a film, front of the screen. In olden days, you wanted to chat, you had this rotary dial, black color phone that you would call, that you wouldn't connect, etc. Right now, front of the screen. Reading newspaper, watching football matches, catching up with the Man U news, front of the screen. You want to play football, front of the screen. Right? You have all of these sensor motion games these days. You can do your yoga, you can do your cookery classes, you can play golf, you can play tennis, everything front of the screen. Punishment. Punishment used to be go sit in the corner in your room. Today, a lot of fun. So many gadgets in the room, right? Punishment has also changed, front of the screen. Earlier, on a lighter note, all of this you can take, but you know, value systems have changed. Look at this slide that says, if a child asked a parent, who made the world? Typically, a parent would have talked about God. Today, he says, go look it up on Google. In the olden days, schools looked like this. Today, it's all multimedia. And rightfully, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that I'm building a case for connectivism. I'm building a case for e-learning. Because when we say that international schools are doing a whole bunch of right stuff in terms of pedagogical approaches, I don't know if you're completely present to the fact of how important connectivism is in the real-time children learning. I'm going to end with this slide. I have a whole bunch more, but I promised Steve that I'm going to keep time. I'm going to end with this slide. I'm going to leave this because every grade, you know, the first is K3, and then 4 to 6, and 7 and 8, and 9 and 12, and higher ed. Everywhere there are teaching learning platforms internationally that I urge every teacher to be part of. We do not live in India. We live in a global world. We do not compete in India. We compete for PISA. Just one last anecdote. When I read about PISA results for India, we don't figure, and if we do, it's like the bottom 3, okay? I was like, so let me tell you which kids they tested for India. Some government school in Tamil Nadu, they tested in India. And naturally, the results were like bottom 3. And I was like, why did they do that? Why didn't they test our kids, like yours and my school kind of kids? Then we would have shown Indian performance. But you know what? When I thought through it, it's right and proper. Worldwide, whether China or Finland or America or South Korea, which are like toppers, all the municipal children, all the government children, everybody is being tested. Then why not India? It's not about privileged schools. It's not about private education. It's about that 94% that is going to government schools. That, unless that improves, Indian education will not improve. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having me here.
So I would like to thank Manjula for an exciting and entertaining as well informative, educative presentation that I think really spells out where we stand globally as a nation right now and the kind of challenges that are in front of us. So a lot of great food for thought there. Okay, let us move ahead. Lina, you go next. Are you ready? Okay. So I was fortunate to meet Lina not too long ago. I think it was maybe about 2 months ago or so in Mumbai. And her reputation preceded her because I had, of course, heard of Kangaroo Kids even before I met her, which is, I think many of us know, a growing phenomenon in education. She is the chairperson in children's education with Kangaroo Kids that she started, and it has become an extremely large chain of schools, over 80+ schools in 17 different cities, as well as 2 in Dubai and Maldives as well. I would love to visit you, your center there one day, so please do be sure to call me in for a workshop. As well as, in addition to that, Billabong International School and its newest affiliate, Brainworks. So I think a great person to have with us in this international session. She's spanning both India as well as the international waters in many ways. So over to you, Lina.
Good evening. Good evening. Still not very warm, but okay, I'll make do. I've grown up in Australia, and I came here. I started a chain of preschools called Kangaroo Kids, and then it was time for my son to go to school. And I didn't want him going through the conventional rote learning, and that's all that was really available at the time, other than one school called the American School of Bombay. They're still allowed to call themselves the American School of Bombay. So I put him in that school. Thank God I was an Australian national, so I had access to the school. He's an Australian national. I could pay the fees in dollars. So one of the very few people who could have access to international schooling at the time, and one of the few people who could actually afford the fees. He started school mid-1995, and one day a parent representative of the school called me up and said, Miss Ashar, could you please send 100 apples to school? So I asked her, why? What would you like to do with 100 apples? And she said, oh, it's Halloween, we're having a Halloween party, and we'd like to play Bob the Apple. So I said, oh, and what will happen to these apples after the kids finish bruising and battering the apples in Bob the Apple? She said, well, we just throw them away. And for me, that went against every grain as a parent, and what I was trying to bring my son up, already living in Pali Hill, already being one of the lotus-eating kids, and me trying to find him to try and keep him grounded in that whole sense of privilege. So that was my quest. I said, we need to start international schools at Indian affordable prices. Of course, affordable price is always a question, but then some form of quality comes at a cost. For me, the big thing was that for my son and for all the other kids, it's not about IQ. One of the things we talk about, whether we're talking about PISA or we're talking about standardized testing, I feel we're testing the wrong things. We're testing for maths, science, and what else? Maths, science, and reading. And to me, most of that's archaic. I mean, you've got iPads talking to you now. You don't even have to read. You don't really even have to write anymore. So for me, IQ anyway was always 10% of the entire formula that will make up the adult human success code. For me, the other 90% is made up of SQ, the spiritual quotient, the PQ, the passion quotient we can build in kids, and the EQ, the emotional quotient. When this mom said this to me, I sadly asked her, what is the legacy we will pass on to our kids if we allow them to play with 100 apples in this beautiful infrastructure of an international school, when in the slums close by and on the streets we have Indian children starving? I'd like to say that for me the word international is not essential because it only denotes what kind of examination the kids will sit. I believe all our schools can be international, even if they're CBSE or ICSE schools. All the schools that I operate under various boards, some CBSE, some ICSE, some IGCSE, and for me that they're all international schools because for me it's not about the board affiliation or the examination, but it's more about the universal best practices that we will practice in the schools, such as good student-teacher ratios, being assessed for depth and application of learning, and being accountable to parents by demonstrating real performances of understanding by their kids. All three boards that we offer have an equal focus on developing the Qs, the IQ, the PQ, the SQ, and the EQ. There are many challenges going forward. The first is, unfortunately, the majority of Indian parents do not understand academic and other areas of development that schools offer. Parents who look for an international school equate lavish infrastructure with the word international and high quality. With the cost of buying real estate or leasing real estate and developing the infrastructure means we will never have enough international schools. Again, I reiterate, my definition of international school is only based on best universal practice in learning. We're making some moves in the correct direction, but still, I say, for instance, the CBSE is currently talking about the CCE and open book exams, but I feel that if we just merely ape Western concepts and phrases without a deep understanding, it'll mean that implementation will always be a huge challenge. The small set of teachers who truly understand and can apply deep learning methodology to Indian and international boards are sorely lacking. So very often in our so-called international schools, we have teachers teaching a new curriculum framework in the conventional way. So while all the school billboards and ads talk the correct talk, such as holistic values, inquiry-based approach, multiple intelligences, and reaching one's highest potential, it would be interesting to really study how many of them are able to correctly walk the talk, given the skill sets of teachers who themselves have largely been brought up on a diet of rote learning during their schooling and a beard that does not really equip them to teach anything of international nature. It would be great if we could do a skill rather than qualification audit, how many teachers teaching in international schools are truly up to the task. My philosophy of learning and schooling comes from my life experience and then backed by science and research. I have an older brother who has a phenomenally high IQ. In the first percentile of the human race, our common maths teacher always told my struggling younger brother and myself. Today, my older brother is an employee in a company that my younger brother owns and operates and runs as a CEO. That experience began my life question of why. We all know that when the brain and mind has a burning question why, the how and what will follow. And my why led to the kind of instruction we do in our schools, which is only partly an academic focus. If kids are academically, if they have the aptitude for great grades, they will get them. But we do have to find what kids are born for other than that. I recently published a book, largely because I wanted to advocate to teachers and parents that we need to actually change the entire focus of education, not just here, but internationally as well. So in a book I recently published called Who Do You Think You're Kidding? I quote Andrew Hacker, professor of political science, whose research says, on the whole, most individuals with high IQ levels will peak during their academic years or perhaps during an initial job they receive on the strength of test results. However, after that, they will soon be surpassed by individuals who possess more applied forms of intelligence that are not necessarily revealed by tests. I also quote American psychologist Paul Torrance, who says that above 115 or 120 at the most, IQ scores have very little or no bearing on creativity. Why is this shift from a focus on IQ essential? Just as any major economic or social change has an implication on every aspect of life, globalization and the digital revolution have not only changed the way we work and play, but also the way we must educate our kids. The challenge around this is that we have the pressure that no matter which board our school opts for, the focus is still largely only on IQ, and still not gauging development of SQ, PQ, and EQ in a manner in which we know students will be intrinsically driven to find his why, his purpose of being, or his life calling. We're also constrained by boards, and also now by government policies and politicization of education. Not only are we entrepreneurs, schools dependent on government bodies for all our NOCs, etc., but now we have new government regulations and reforms like the RTE that we have to struggle with, where investors no longer want to invest in education. When I arrived in India, even elite schools, the few handful of them, were the kings, and parents were paupers, running from school to school in desperate search of the proverbial seat in the school. As private providers began investing in education, or teacher entrepreneurs like myself began inspiring high net worth individuals to invest, a subtle shift began, one which allowed parents to demand quality and allowed parents to also select a school that aligned with their philosophy. Is that my buzz? What this started was an increase in the quality of education being offered, as even old historical conventional schools were forced to innovate or lose their edge. I argue that we need economic freedom for schools. Competition between schools is the best way to increase the number of good schools, and only for-profit schools will have the incentive to expand. I'll quickly run through that. And I sort of advocate that schools need greater independence in setting fees, in setting the way that they will actually educate kids. I'm all for the RTE in spirit, but I urge politicians involved in education to have a dialogue with us on its implementation so that we don't go back to schools being king and parents the paupers. It used to take me on initiation of a school between 6 to 8 years to break even. With the RTE, when we remodel our business plan, the break even goes from 6 to 8 to 8 to 15 years. We pay taxes and education cess, but that no longer seems to be enough. My big question to politicians, if they keep intervening in education, who will continue to invest? Thank you.
Thank you, Lina, for reminding us of what's really important in education and for the type of change that we now need to step into in the future. And if I could just take a brief second to mention that I'm in India for the last 2 decades, and when I came, I was probably a little bit younger than you, and I had brown hair that was probably similar to yours. And I just have to say this, that Ryan talked about change and the need for change and embracing change. It's funny, like when you can step back over a period of time and look, and you can actually see change happening. The kind of things that the speakers are speaking about now, nobody was talking about at that time. So when I see leaders of education, not just talking these things, but walking it as well, I have to say that it's inspiring. We do need more change. A lot of change is going to come, but very much appreciated the kind of things that you're mentioning about where we need to go. So thank you for the, and I also have to say something that's changed. 20 years ago, no Indian speakers would stick to a 10-minute time frame. So thank you very much. 45 minutes was like the minimum. So thank you, all of you. That you're really behaving well. Okay, let's move forward. Okay. Yes, our next speaker is Rajeev Katyal, who's country director of the Global Indian International School. He has a long and interesting background, moving originally from the Delhi College of Engineering. He had an MBA from IIM. He moved on to NIIT, where he became vice president. From there, he was the director of education at Microsoft and has had 30 years of experience in education and training. Now he heads, with all of this education and wisdom behind him, the Global Indian International School. So we want to hear what international means to you, Rajeev, please.
Okay, international education, you see, India is a very complex country, and you can't say very clearly this is India. Similarly, you can't point a finger and say this is Indian education. Does PISA test describe its quality? Do our best schools describe the quality? Just like India is a complex country, our education system also is very complex, and it can't be painted with a single brush or described in one line. So in engineering, for example, we have the IITs, people rubbing shoulders with the best in the world, to colleges which are fairly good, to ones which are not so good, to ones which even the owners don't know whether they exist or not. It's that bad. Okay, we have schools, the best of international schools, the outstanding Kendriya Vidyalayas, Navodaya Vidyalayas. If you go to Gujarat, where I've opened a couple of schools, you know, some parents prefer the state board. And there are some schools which even the staff doesn't know whether they exist or where they exist. So it is a spectrum, it's a continuation of things. And there's a solution for every spectrum which has to be worked out. At the primary education level in the government sector, the right to education, the spread of education, the availability of teachers, their training, buildings is important. In secondary education, in the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, what's important is the number of secondary schools go up, and the middle schools get upgraded to secondary schools. In the higher education sector, we just need to open more universities and colleges, maybe 500 universities more, or 1,500 more, and about 30,000 colleges more. So everything is a different segment, and everything has its own challenges, and there can't be a single description of it all. Every segment requires a typical solution. The international schools are another segment, and therefore they require, you know, a separate treatment, because they are being driven by what I call the demand for globalization. There is a main driver behind the growth of international schools in India. The Indian economy is globalizing, there are multinationals coming to India, employing Indians. There's a great outsourcing boom, where today a youngster just out of college talks to an American or a Britisher or a European and tells him about what he can do with his credit card. The Indians going to work abroad, a young software engineer who is passed out of Warangal from engineering college, in 2 years finds himself or herself in Amsterdam, doesn't know what to do, how to behave abroad, what's the etiquette around there. Indians are acquiring companies abroad. So India is globally integrating. And therefore it requires an entrepreneurial workforce, a managerial workforce, which is capable of this global assimilation. And that is the main driver today behind the growth of international schools in India, and that's why they are mushrooming. However, like any other fad, you know, they can't grow too fast. If you're talking of starting an international school, or what you call a global school in the true sense of the word, then you have to cater to some things to make it world class. I mean, there are all those affiliations with boards, CBSC, IGCSC, ICSC, IB, those affiliations are there. But typically a good international school should have a good global exchange program. The students of that school and teachers should be able to exchange views, information, education freely with other such schools all over the world. They need to bring in global best practices in teaching, where the learning is not by rote. And I think what is very important in these schools is the use of technology. Technology, whereas, comes through the use of just teaching IT, down to the use of technology in smart rooms, down to special labs like the maths lab, the social science lab, the geography lab, home science lab, composite lab. In all these labs, you require to put in a lot of technology into these schools, which is important. And believe me, when parents go for an international school, one of the most important things they look at is infrastructure. They expect a big school with lots of infrastructure. They expect technology. They expect to see methods of learning which are not followed in normal schools. And they expect to see a very, very vigorous global exchange program, backed by very good results in international boards. These are characteristics. So like I said, every segment, whether it's the primary education segment, the government sector, the higher education sector, or whether it's the international schooling sector, each had its own requirement. India is a complex education spectrum. And these are some of the demands which are required of international schooling in India. My last slide is basically to look at, how do you open international schools in India? What are the challenges being faced? What are the opportunities? Today, primarily the demand for international schools is coming up in metros and tier 1 towns. The metros have it in plenty. The tier 1 towns are beginning to show this kind of requirement. And it will spread downwards. It will spread. Very, very funnily, unlike other schools, international schools seem not to be driven by location constraint. You don't have to have a school in a prime location. It can be far away from town. An example is Pathways or the Calorx school I've seen in Ahmedabad. Location is not the issue. Because what is important is these schools typically tend to have a large size, which you don't get in the middle of the city. You get outside the city. So location is not the issue, but the infrastructure investment in the schools is going to be of a higher order as opposed to other schools to other boards. Another issue is that you're going to cater, when you open an international school, you will cater to a very narrow segment. Although demand is growing, but even today, at the price level at which they operate, the kind of people who want this kind of schooling, you're catering to a very, very narrow segment, which is growing. It's growing with time. But that is going to be, so if more schools open, they will go after the same segment. Because the kind of teaching methods used here are very, very different in nature, the teacher availability will be a major issue. And as you spread from metro to tier 1 to tier 2, this will become a bigger constraint. So teacher availability is issue. More or less, many of these schools have a very strong residential component. Hence the land size also is large. So these are some of the special characteristics for these schools, the kind of opportunities coming up, the kind of challenges coming up. But the kind of growth we are seeing in the rate of these schools, the way they are growing, it clearly is a segment of great future significance, and I think will grow with time in India to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajeev, for an interesting perspective about what international means and what it really needs to mean as we go forward in the future, realizing that all schools are different across the great expanse, not just of India, but also internationally. It's very funny, when I first came to India and I would be in some neighborhood someplace, in some small sector, some back streets, and there would be some Mickey Mouse International School. And I would wonder that, where did they get that international from? What does it actually mean? And I think it's interesting that international is actually starting to mean something, and starting to mean something on India's terms, and not just a tag to try to make it appear to be something more than it is. So thank you for that elucidation. Okay, let's move forward, right? Priyamvada. I got it right? Okay. Priyamvada Taneja is currently working with the International Baccalaureate Organization as the Development Manager for India, Development Manager. Her work involves fostering the interests of the IB, its programs and services in India. Prior to this, since 2010, she was working jointly for the International Baccalaureate Organization as University Liaison Officer, South Asia, and for the British School, New Delhi, as the University Guidance Counselor. Her role involved working with universities and governments on the recognition of IB programs, with a particular emphasis on ensuring tertiary pathways for IB students in India. I think with the fascinating, phenomenal growth of IB throughout the country, it's going to be interesting to hear your perspective. How about a round of applause?
Good evening, everyone. I would first like to thank you, all of you, for being here. Everyone's been really attentively listening, and it's really great. And of course, the fellow panelists, I mean, I have to follow their league and stick to the deadline. And of course, as educators, you know that how we love to speak, and given the podium, I could speak a lot about international education coming from the background that I'm coming from, but I will definitely stick to the timeline. And my perspective is going to be very different from my fellow colleagues who've spoken here, because I'm speaking from a very international school education perspective, and of course, I do want you to understand, and I'm starting with an apology, not saying that I don't understand the Indian context. I'm born and brought up here. I completely understand the context, but where I am working right now, I'm speaking from a very international schools perspective. So sorry if it's a bit of a warped opinion, but I think it's important to look at the topic and look at what international schools in India are, what are the challenges and opportunities for our schools here. If we look back in terms of the education trends by the 60s, I mean, there was a change from a very traditional memorizing, same content for everybody, individual subjects, and a very didactic, teacher-centric approach to a very progressive project-based, testing students on various skills, transdisciplinary, which is something I'm going to refer again back to that again, and constructivism, which Manjula also mentioned, and a very child-centric approach. So there was already a change that happened, and that was a trend in 60s, and that's when the international schools school movement started, or for that matter, the International Baccalaureate movement started. Okay, it's not working. Okay, if we talk about international education, I mean, what does it mean? The former, the first Director General of the International Baccalaureate, he defined it as the education for the whole child, and that's not something which is new to us educators. It's something we want to do, but I think sometimes are limited by the classrooms or the curriculum that we have to teach. What it means is to enjoy the environment. And I think it's really important that learning should be enjoyable instead of just being content heavy. And that's something, that's where the international education system started. Mr. Katyal defined it very, very well, what is international education. And it's not just about your affiliation to a curriculum, it's a broader set of values. A broader set of values, international mindedness, an education which breaks down the barriers of race, culture, and which has, and is an education for peace. And that's what international education means. So it doesn't matter, you could be any school or you could be any curriculum, but you could be international in a true sense if you adhere to these values and teach for and have that mission statement. What India has seen, I mean, international education isn't new to India. We've seen our leaders go for tertiary education outside the country. But I think what's changed now is that it's also changed with a lot of schools coming up in India, which wasn't a scenario a few years back. I mean, if I just talk about the IB schools, there was, the first school was authorized in 1976. And then now today, in 2013, we have 100 schools. And given the way, the amount of number of applications that we get, this growth could easily double up in 5 to 7 years. And for us as an organization, it has its own set of challenges, and I will talk about those challenges in a bit. But we have seen a phenomenal growth. And of course, then there are other international boards which also exist. So there is a huge growth that India has seen over the last few years. In terms of what other, I mean, this has been touched by other speakers as well. What are some of the growth drivers? What are the opportunities for India? I mean, there is a clear demand and supply gap. And in that scenario, the international schools have also come up. In terms of government reform and higher spending, and of course somebody talked about it as a challenge in terms of RTE, but I think it's also an opportunity in the sense that the government is thinking about education. There is a greater emphasis on education, and with all the foreign university tie-ups which we foresee will happen in future, this will also have an impact on school education. So more and more international schools will come up. There's also been a change in the mindset of parents and teachers and all the stakeholders. I mean, in a middle-class family which couldn't afford an international education, now education is considered as an investment. There is greater affluence. So that's also something which is a great opportunity for schools in international education. I mean, if you look at the number of students who go abroad for tertiary studies, I mean, India was the second largest country, and that's the Open Doors data. So there's obviously a lot of students going abroad for studies, and what they found is that there is the international system of education plays importance on writing intensive skills, research skills, which the transition to the university is better when you're exposed to that kind of education system in your school life. So that's also led to a certain growth in the international schools. I mean, if you talk about global migratory trends, in the previous, I mean, in my parents' generation, when I remember we were moving from cities to cities, the decision was to be taken that do we put her into a state board or a CBSE board? At that point of time, for the sake of continuity, the decision was that it should be a CBSE, because if we're going to move every 2 years, pick up our bags and move every 2 years, then it's extremely important that there is a continuity of education. Similarly, with the way the global migratory trends are now, with the no national barriers, and parents are moving from country to country for their jobs, it's really important, and they look at a continuity of education. So there is a seamless transition for their child moving from one country to the other. Also, in terms of the standards, the international programs are globally benchmark standards, and it's easy for students to then move on to another country and study the similar program if offered in their country. And most of the times, the international programs are offered in those countries. In terms of for 21st century skills, and I know we heard this a lot even in the last session, the Fortune 500 came up with a list of desired skills, and in which teamwork, collaboration, critical thinking, problem solving were the desired skills. If you look at international education, and I'm going to spend just a minute on this, what the international programs do, and I can particularly talk about the International Baccalaureate, is in the 4 programs that we offered, there is a continuum which runs through, and the continuum is approaches to learning. So it's not just about the content. We feel that these skills will lead to a better acquisition of knowledge, and that's the focus that the international programs have. In terms of challenges, I mean, I'm not going to say that there aren't challenges, there definitely are, and I'm going to obviously also add the challenge, one of the stakeholders as the international boards, and I'll talk about it in the end. Parents do this program a lot of times for pragmatic reasons. It's taken as a ticket or a passport for their child to study abroad. So sometimes the visionary or the philosophical aspect of the program is lost. And there is also, it's difficult sometimes for them to understand what the program is all about. Okay, I can hear my buzz, and I'm going to quickly run through this. In terms of students, the problems are pretty much similar. It eventually, sometimes it only means grades, grades, and grades. And so the understanding of the program is lost sometimes. Teachers, a lot of people talked about the lack of teachers in the country, so I'm not going to dwell on that so much. But I think one of the things that I do want to add in terms of the teachers is the change in the pedagogical shift, which is sometimes difficult to do. And what it does mean for school managements, which is a challenge for school managements, is to put in the resources to train those teachers, to get the training, to imbibe the philosophy, And because there are so many schools now and it's a lot of choice, the teachers move from schools to schools, and I'm sure the managements would agree to that as a challenge for them to be able to retain teachers. In terms of government and regulatory bodies, I mean, Lina talked about the NOCs from governments. There's also problems at the higher ed level. The universities don't have an understanding of what an international education means. From where I am, and I've worked with universities and governments in India, 35% of students last year who did the diploma program at the end of, which is a 11th and 12th year, 35% of students wanted to stay in India. So there is a growth of students wanting to stay back in India, and it's really important to find them that pathway and to find an institution which will have the same learning styles as they are used to. So that's something which is a struggle as well. Last but not the least, from our perspective, from an international organization perspective, I think one of the challenges for us is to manage the growth and to retain the quality. And that's something that we also would like, feel is a challenge for us. And also to remember that it's the vision and the mission of the organization that's important. You have to value those aspects, and you will definitely do well if you value those and follow those. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Priyamvada.
Sorry about the time.
Very interesting. And I think your perspective that you've provided about how global has a very different meaning. It used to be only a very privileged few who could travel abroad and get their education abroad and get that type of quality global or international education, and that now, as you've pointed out, many people have that mobility to be able to move around, and how important it is for us to have those standards here so they will have that mobility. So thank you for those clarifications. Okay. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the next speaker, not only because I would call her a friend and a colleague, but I think she's one of the most colorful educators out there, well, both in dress, but as well as in the type of work. If you know Vandana, you know how creative she is, you know how progressive she is, and you know how innovative she is. I'll read some of the formal stuff here, and then I'll say a couple other things. But yes, she has a rich background in the arts, a BA in English Literature and History from the National College, an MA in History, a BEd and MEd, and a doctorate degree, I should call you doctor, doctorate degree in Managing Learning Disabilities using Technology. At present, she heads the Podar International School as the director, which is part of the Anandalal and Ganesh Podar Society. I'm sure anybody who's in Mumbai, if you're in the Santa Cruz area and you see those few blocks that are there, how amazingly everything is organized and what great education goes on in that area. The motto of the school is Education for Enrichment, Enhancement, and Excellence. Over the more recent years, let's just say that she's been abroad numerous times for training herself in IB and in CIE programs, and has been undertaking the overseeing of IB and IB curriculum and setting up of many IB schools throughout the country. The school curriculum, as she sees it, should be designed to help each learner and each child fulfill his or her potential by providing a wide general education and encouraging a community of spirit and a sense of responsibility. I could probably go on, but I'm going to stop and hand it over to Vandana. I'm sure she's going to give us a lot of great insights. Thank you. And a round of applause.
Thanks, Steve, for that lovely introduction. Dignitaries on the dais and off the dais. I think it's been quite a boring afternoon and evening listening to each one of these speakers repeating more or less the same thing, and I decided I wouldn't show my presentation because I can find some people yawning at the back, some sleeping, and I thought that let me just actually tell you why I started IB school in Mumbai. This actually goes back to my own daughter who was completing her graduation and asking me to send her to London School of Economics for further studies. And that's where I said to her that I don't think I can afford to send you to LSE because it's too expensive. It was the top-ranking university in the world, and I thought to myself that at that particular time, I actually refused to support her or help her. And then she went to the local university. She went to Mumbai University and she completed her graduation. And she had a friend, her best friend, Harsha, who was doing her IB in the international school, TISB in Bangalore, and then she got a complete scholarship in University of London LSE program. And they both actually, day one, day out, they would communicate with each other. And both applied for a job. Believe me, my daughter who completed her BMS and MBA distinction, the starting salary for her was just 25,000. And this child, who actually completed her LSE program from University of London, her starting salary was 68,500. And she came up to me and she said, "Mom, you saw what you did to me." And sitting on the chair in my school, as a head of a school, I felt, if this happens to my daughter, what would happen to the children in the years to come? I went up to my boss that time, Dr. Podar, and I asked him whether we can start an international school. I was an ordinary school principal coming from a very ordinary background, very ambitious, lots of aspirations. And he looked at me and he said, "This building, do you think you can ever start an international school?" And I said, "I am researching on international education for the last 10 years, and I think that it would be possible for me to start." And believe me, 10 years back, we started the International Baccalaureate Primary Years program, and then we went on to the IB Diploma program. We started the IGCSE A-levels. And it was my dream to get London School of Economics in Mumbai, in India. I went up to University of London and signed. I had to make too many roads to cross, but I signed an MOU and I run, and I'm the principal of London School of Economics in Mumbai, and I run most of their courses. This is the dream I want for these children in India, not because I know that, I don't say that we all, when you think back, why did ICSE come into existence when the local school curriculum was running very well? We had state school curriculum years ago. Why did ICSE come into being? Have you ever thought, why did CBSE come into existence? We were all doing local state curriculum. You would see the changes. I don't know why people ask that why there are so many international schools. Come on. There is globalization. The country is moving. Everything is moving. Why not education? And I must say, my journey was very hard because when I started IB education, Priyamvada was not there. I hope she was there. Today, because of Priyamvada being there, there's a lot of support that IB and Cambridge representatives are present in India. There was nobody who allowed me to get into an IB school. When I approached some IB schools, they said, "Sorry, you don't have a red passport." And I just look back. And when I look back, I say that I know lots and lots of challenges at that time to start an international school, to run an international curriculum. Lots and lots of challenges, I would say 10 or 12 years ago. But today, thanks to IB, you have Priyamvada. If you want to start an IB school, contact her, fill up the forms, and you know there are many, many IB schools supportive to start the same. We have SAIBSA, another platform where all IB schools come together to share. So I think that, yes, there are a lot of opportunities. And why is it that international education is becoming popular? Please note, the economy is going up. The per capita income is going up. Because people can afford, and let's be honest and frank, it is not something which is coming cheap. Not at all. I wouldn't ever agree. The kind of affiliation cost, the kind of resources cost, kind of teacher cost, kind of training cost, you can't run the IB curriculum until all your staff is trained by the IB board. So let's face that there is an opportunity, but there are challenges. There are big challenges. One is the cost factor. It's not for all. I think it's a long way. If we have many, many, many more international schools, maybe the prices may come down. It's the demand and the supply. But believe me, I think another challenge that I see is that there are not many international universities. There are many students, many Indian parents' aspirations for their children to become doctors and engineers, and you don't see international universities in India. So you have the international curriculum till grade 12th, and what do you do after that if you want to continue with the international certification? And why has international education come here? Because there has been a lot of NRI crowd back into the country, a lot of non-resident Indians who have come back to the country because of the, we all know that the world economy went down at a particular time. So they were looking at Indian ethos, Indian culture, Indian values, and at the same time, international certification. So I think that the evolution and the starting of international education is basically the people that have got this international education into the country. Thank you.
You did. You not only kept your time, but you have an extra minute, which I'm going to borrow from you at the end. Thank you for being true to your inimitable style and self, and going off the board and speaking from your heart, because I think that's really the most impactful way for us to feel and understand the journey that people have taken and why they've taken it, and especially why the IB has so much relevance. And to see the challenges that you've overcome, I think it gives hope to a lot of people that they might not have had otherwise. So thank you for that. Really nice. Okay. Next up, I would like to introduce Rita Wilson. And I just want to say that, you know, when you find out and you ask somebody, as I was talking to Rita just before, to tell me a little bit about herself so I could address the audience and share it with, it's the people who are sometimes the most accomplished who say so little about themselves. She said hardly a few lines, and she said, if I say these few things, it's really enough. She's the former chief executive and secretary for the Council of Indians School Certificate Examination and academic lead. Well, currently, I'll get to that in a second, but in her role there with the council, she has, if anybody is from a council school, my own school, Jiva Public School, we have been touched by her dedication, her enthusiasm, and you know it when a person is almost absent from the situation, that how effective they are being in their administration. So I would commend you on that. After the work that she has done there, she's gone on to advise many schools. She's been on the board of numerous schools and numerous organizations. Currently, as she has said, the academic lead for developed schools. So she's out there to help schools open up and to get the latest, the most progressive types of curriculum and education systems possible. And I'm sure she's going to share a little bit about that with us today. Round of applause, please, for Rita Wilson.
Good evening, friends, and thank you for being so patient to allow me to speak as the last speaker of the day. I must commend you for your patience and enthusiasm, and as Steve very rightly said, your dedication to the cause of education. So thank you very much, and I hope I'll be able to say something to you. I'm not speaking about international schools today. As you see, I'm talking about changing paradigms in education in the globalized world. Today what we see is that every country on this earth is trying to reform its education. There are two reasons for this. The first reason is economic, as we all know. That is, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of this new millennium? The second reason is cultural. Every country on this planet is trying to figure out how to educate children so that they have a sense of their cultural identity while being part of the process of globalization. So the question is, how do we square that circle? And the problem with today's education in our country is that it does not equip you with even the basic skills to get a job. Our present system of education was conceived, designed, and structured in the 19th century. It was a very different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Age of Enlightenment and the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. This was built upon the assumption that real intelligence is deductive in nature. And we must have certain knowledge of the classics. And this we came to recognize as academic ability, or in other words, the IQ of a person. This is deeply ingrained in the gene pool of public education, not only here, but I think all over. So according to our system of education, there are two types of persons: the academic and the non-academic, the smart and the non-smart people. The consequence of that is that many brilliant people think that they're not brilliant because they are being judged against a particular point of view. So on the one hand, there are the intellectual people. On the other hand, there are the economic people. And I feel this model has caused a lot of chaos in the world of education. You see this picture on the slide. This is a lady called Gillian Lynn. Not many people know about her. She went to school in the 1930s. She's an American. And one day, her parents got a note from the school that Gillian has a learning disorder. So what did the parents do? The mother took her to a specialist. She was led into this room and she was made to sit. And the mother went on telling the doctor all the woes that Gillian suffered from. She was fidgety in school. She couldn't concentrate in school. Her homework was late. She could not answer properly in school. And the doctor kept on listening. Finally, when her mother had finished, the doctor got up, went to Gillian, and told her, "Look, Gillian, your mother has told me everything she could about you. But I need to speak to her privately about you. So we're going out, and please wait. We'll be back very soon." So he led.
No, that was somebody else's.
Oh, I thought my time was over.
Not guilty.
Okay, thank you.
You still have 2 minutes according to
Sorry for the interruption. So he led Mrs. Lynn out of the room, and before leaving, he switched on the radio that was sitting on his desk. And they went out and told Mrs. Lynn, "Now just wait and watch what happens." And lo and behold, the moment the music started, Gillian was up on her feet and dancing. And the doctor told her mother, "Mrs. Lynn, Gillian is not sick. Take her to a dance school." And today Gillian says That's what my mother did. In today's time, in an Indian school, maybe that tier 2 or tier 3 city, if such a thing had happened, the child would have been taken to a doctor. The doctor would have given her some medication to calm down and focus on her studies. Today, our children are living in highly stimulating times. They're besieged by information from all quarters, whether it's the computer, the internet, the phone, the advertising, hoardings, the hundreds of channels of television. And then what do we say? We penalize them for being distracted. And what are they distracted from? They're distracted from the boring stuff that is taught in the school. Can we blame them? I don't think so. Every education system on this earth has a hierarchy of subjects. Right on top are the mathematics and sciences, as was talked about earlier. Then come the languages, then comes humanities, and the arts are right at the bottom. There isn't a single education system all over the world who teaches dancing every day in the school, just as mathematics is taught. Because mathematics is an important subject. But all children tend to dance. They love dancing. We all have bodies. I think we also dance. Even while I'm standing here, these gestures that I'm making, this is all part of dance, our bodily movements. But what happens in our education system? As we educate the children, a time comes when we start educating them from waist upwards. They're educated waist upwards. And then we come to the head. And when we come to the head also, then only on one side of the head is educated. The other side we don't take care of. So that's what happens on this earth. What are we doing? We are anesthetizing our students. We're putting them to sleep, whereas we should be waking them up so that they become aware of what is inside them. A few more minutes. You see, the model of education that we have, as I said earlier, is the model of the days of industrialization. Schools are still organized on factory lines, where children sit in neat rows. The bell is rung. There is compartmentalized subject delivery. There are special facilities for special subjects. There is no intermingling. But why is that? Why is it that we do this? We still educate children according to batches and age groups. Why is there this assumption that, like products, there's nothing else more important than the date of manufacture or the date of best before? That's what we do to our children. I'm sure all of us know of children of same age, but who are intellectually better than others, who can work better in a group, or better in a small group, or some child might be able to work the best individually on his or her own. We talk a great deal about creative thinking now, as one of the 21st century skills. But lately, a great deal has been said about divergent thinking, which is not the same as creativity. The process of creativity is having original ideas, but what is diversity? Having lots of ideas, lots of possible answers to the same question. A study on divergent thinking was carried out in America some years ago. And 1,500 subjects were tested for divergent thinking. And the researchers decided that if the child got above a certain percentage, then that child would be labeled as genius. Now, the study was conducted on kindergarten kids who were 5 years old. Do you know how many were in the genius category? 98% were in the genius category. Now, since this was a longitudinal study, again it was repeated 5 years later on the same group of subjects when they were 8 to 10 years old, and then again another 5 years later. But what was found out? That as time progressed, as they were educated, their divergent thinking processes were slowed down. Their divergent thinking deteriorated. This tells us a very interesting story. It shows two things. Number one, that we all have the capacity for divergent thinking. And the second is that with education, it deteriorates. We have to start thinking differently. We have to realize what our human capacity is. Today, our education system has strip-mined us the way we strip-mined the earth of commodities. And there is a very famous quote from Jonas Salk, and I quote here. He says, if all the insects were to disappear from the earth, within 50 years, all life on this earth would disappear. But if all human beings disappeared from the earth, within 50 years, all forms of life would flourish. And I think he's right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rita, for an elucidating presentation, and I think also quite interesting many of the stories and examples we've also seen on the TED presentation by Ken Robinson, who happens to be, I think, one of the most inspiring.
I've been inspired by him.
So I appreciate your carrying that forward and making many of those ideas also available. I would check that out also. I might suggest to the audience members, if you have seen TED, TED.com, and if you check out Sir Ken Robinson, if you just search it out, you'll find some really amazing things, and I think a very fascinating elucidation. So my appreciation to you for that. Okay, just one correction. I'm going to be the last speaker of the day. I was, that's all right, and I appreciate everybody sticking within their time frames because, like I said, that enables me to utilize some of the minutes that you haven't utilized. But I will certainly keep within my range of time, and it'll just take me a minute to find, if maybe somebody could help me to load this from there, someone who can help me find out where they've been kept. Okay, so while this is coming up, I hope you don't mind my back to you, but you can catch me on the monitor over here. So I've been in India for the last 20 years, and some of you might know me. Originally, I was not supposed to be an educator. My plans were to become a rock star. I had a very strong interest in music while I was growing up, and I was very sure that I was going to be a musician. And I think one of the things that an international, global country, I'm from America, offers is options and opportunities. And we're seeing this as India is starting to grow and so many options are available. It creates a kind of dilemma In other words, that the kind of choices students have had for careers, let's just say in India, have been limited to doctor, lawyer, engineer, because we moved from a very undeveloped country. Those were the only few service jobs that were available once India got its independence and joined the science race. Nehru pushed for the IITs to be open. So all the entire money trail went behind the sciences, and hence the jobs of engineering and sciences became the thing that everybody was after. In a country that's already developed, or that's well developed, there's so many options that are available. And growing up in America, I was one of those who faced what I call the ice cream dilemma. And what I say by the ice cream dilemma is when you go into an ice cream store and there's so many flavors of ice cream and you don't know which one to choose because there's too many of them. That's an ice cream dilemma. And in my own case, growing up, and we've seen this now with so many ice creams that are available today in Baskin-Robbins, there are so many of them, we face this ourselves. The same thing is there for careers. Years ago, we didn't have an ice cream dilemma of careers in India, but today we have it because there are so many jobs opening up in hospitality and opening up in the media and event management and planning, and there's so many things that you could become today. Children are facing what I call an ice cream dilemma of careers. So as an international educator, I very much wanted to help guide children to be able to pick the right type of careers for themselves. And I was not satisfied with the tools that were available in India. Career counseling has been something that's only evolved very, very recently. Career counselors have been treated with contempt. Many times they cover up for the physics teacher who's absent or the PT teacher who's absent. Go send the career counselor. So my belief is that we are studying in school for a reason, because at the end of the day, in addition to the values, in addition to those things, we have to get a job. But the question is, now that things are developing and so many options are available, how are we going to pick those options? So with my own students at the Jiva Public School, and with many students, and even some of the educators here have worked with me, I developed a model that helps identify personalities a bit more clearly. I've used the multiple intelligences model very much. We are all familiar with it. And I created something called the multiple natures model, which also identifies additional traits that can help people make really good career decisions. I'm not going to speak about multiple natures today, only because if I got into it, I don't think I could do justice with anything less than about a half hour or more. Multiplenatures.com, you can find out a lot about it. And my book is also out there called Solving the Ice Cream Dilemma. Please do check it out. It's very tasty. What I am going to show you is the new tool that we've just developed. We've had something called the MN test, or the Multiple Natures test, running for the last 4 years. In about a week, we're going to launch the new version of it, which is very exciting. So I'm giving you a sneak peek today, which you'll be able to see at staging.multiplenatures.com. It'll be in staging for about another week, and then you'll have full access to it. But essentially what we have going on now is, after you do the test, you'll be able to see your strong natures and your strong intelligences in some graphs that are listed here. So you can see actually where you're strong. In the very simple categories, and kids, parents, counselors, teachers can understand them quite easily. Whoops, okay. Let's get this going again. Okay. After you do the test, you're able to see a report. So there's a complete detailed report that you would get that explains all about your nature. Let's see, maybe I could do this. Yeah. Okay. Okay. The next part is where it gets really cool. It's like a mixture between Shaadi.com and TripAdvisor. Some of us have seen Shaadi.com and TripAdvisor. What happens here is that when you do the test, it shows you a list of careers that matches your nature. So here you see one student who says technical writer, news reader, there's an MIS executive. And what you can do from there is start to filter. So you can say that show me which careers match me based on my stream, arts or science, or based on the salary when I get out. I want to get $20,000 per month or $30,000 per month, etc. Or even by how high you want to study. I only want to go to 10+2 and that's it. Or I want to get a graduation. What are the jobs that I can, what are the careers that I could go for? And then last, which are the fields? So you can actually say, show me the best careers for me in the field of hospitality. And it'll pick those out and give you a matching index. So that shows you some of the ideas. So here's what happens when, let's say, a dietitian, if somebody clicks in on it, it will give you the basic stats, how much money you can expect per month, which stream you should go for, the study requirements, even the companies that hire. Because parents, you tell them, Mom, I want to become a dietitian. Or Dad, they'll say, well, I don't know, can you make a living doing that? So they want to know who the companies are that are actually hiring them. The next cool part that you can see here, it's at the bottom of the page, there are even suggested paths how to get there. In other words, if I want to become a dietitian, which are the degrees I need to go through, whether it's a 5-year path, a 3-year path, a 2-year path, because sometimes there's more than one way to become a particular profession. And people don't know that quite often. Once you want to find out now about the paths, you can then go into each degree, and a complete description is given of the degree, what it pertains to, what you need to be able to do that, what the requirements are for, and what it enables you to do afterwards. So it's kind of like a little dictionary of explanations of degree. Finally, when you click the button at the bottom of the degree, this is the really cool part, it takes you to the college finder, so it will show you which colleges offer that degree. And then from here, you can actually filter out and find out the colleges closest to you or in a particular city. So, I mean, essentially, that's it. What we've done is we've demystified the entire process of identifying what is an individual's nature, how to figure out which career matches them. It's like the Google approach. Who are you? Where do you want to go? And how do I get there every single step of the way? So in a way, what we've tried to do is to overcome the career counselor problem, to give counselors a tool, to give parents a tool, to give students a tool that will enable them to understand who they are. And my dream, my vision, is to get every person into RPRP, right person in the right place. My belief is that if educative people become teachers, we'll have all sorts of teachers who love to teach it. If all healing people become doctors, we will not find doctors who are selling kidneys on the open market, et cetera, et cetera. So my dream, my vision is, for me, global, and for me, international, means freedom of choice, but it also means having and using the right tools to be able to get ourselves into RPRP, the right people into the right place. With that, I please do encourage you to check out the website. Like I say, it's going to be in staging for another day or two, or just to about the end of the week. From next week, it will be available. If you would like to get it and like to check it out to do it with your students, please do get in touch. I'll be here afterwards, and I would be happy to answer questions. I thank you, and I would like to thank Ravi and the entire team for giving me the opportunity to chair a wonderful group today, and also to have a few minutes to present what I'm most passionate about. Thank you for that opportunity. I appreciate it. Okay, so I think we'll take some time for some questions. Will we? And do we have a mic maybe to go around the audience if people have? So maybe if you could just say what your question is and to whom you would like to address your question. Or if you want to say to anybody. Anybody have a question for our
Hello.
eminent panel? Yes.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? My question is, what's so great about international schools? The vast majority of IIT graduates, the vast majority of civil servants, the vast majority of the elite, the real intellectual elite of this country, still come from government schools. So what's so big deal?
Who would like to take up the question?
Do you guys want to take from a school's perspective, and then I can add?
Can I have your name?
I'm Siddharth.
Siddharth. Very well taken point. All of us are a product of non-international schools, and we're not doing too badly in life. I think the whole challenge is the 21st century learning, and the fact that learning in a global context has totally changed. And what we used to do in a classroom situation, जो basically हम download of information करते थे, the whole role is finished because of Google. So the job of the teacher is no longer information handing back. मैं आपको explain करती हूँ. My interpretation of how we have learned, I have learned. A teacher will, you have a textbook, I have a textbook, I'm the teacher, you're the student. We will read a para together. Then I will write the para on the blackboard, chalk and talk. You will copy that para in your notebook. And after a few months, I'll question you on that. You will write on that. I will mark you on that. I'm a product of that. I run national schools. I'm not commenting. I'm just saying pedagogical approaches in classrooms have undergone a sea change. We have to simply facilitate. We have to get into a point where the teacher is not standing to tell. The teacher is only asking questions and challenging the minds of children. Let them find the information from wherever. Let them do external research. We have to get into a point where the teacher is just standing. There are group discussions happening on a simple topic that the teacher introduced a day ago. Let the group decide which way they want to answer the question, and the teacher facilitates. There is a sea change in the pedagogical approach, and to my mind, that facilitation requires a different way the teachers have to look at the 21st century students' learning needs.
If I can add, from an international board's perspective, the key question which a student is asking is why in an international curriculum framework. And I'm not saying or debating that this kind of a question students are not asking in other frameworks. But I think what does happen is that it allows the way the curriculum is structured, the pedagogical approach, it allows the student to be a risk taker, to inquire, to ask questions, to ask the why of things. And so the way the international curriculum is structured, it allows the student to do that. Also, when I talked about, you're right what you said about that the students in the IITs and everywhere else, in all the national higher ed institutions are graduating from CBSE or ISC schools. Absolutely agreed to that. But as...
even state government schools.
Yes, absolutely.
Even
and state government schools.
Vernacular schools.
Absolutely. So no one's, and we are all the products of that. I mean, so no one's debating or saying anything about those schools, but what Manjula just talked about is the shift that's happening. We no longer have national barriers. We are moving from one place to the other, from one country to the other for jobs. So what I talked about, there is so much change that's happening in the world. So to equip our skills to be able to work with diverse, complex issues of the 21st century, it is an international education offers that right at the school level, and then students can take that up later on as well.
Before I make a point, out of all of our schools, 90% of our schools are still CBSE and ICSE schools. Okay. In terms of why there are still so many people coming out of the national curriculum schools, going into becoming leaders and going to IITs and going to IIMs, it's a sheer volume. You know, 95% of still the number of schools are government schools, are even private schools, but they're still doing the national curriculum. So that many more applications from national curriculum schools going into these universities. It's nothing to do with which is better or why one is better over the other. It's a numbers thing.
I mean, so there is no way you can, you can prove that the international curriculum is necessarily better. Can you prove that? I mean, the numbers don't speak for the international schools either. They are saying it is better. You know, they are saying it's better.
As I said, I equate international schooling with best practice in learning and education. So you can be a CBSE, you can be an ICSE, you can be an SSE. As long as you're providing quality education, it's great. Another point I'd like to make is the IITs you talk about were the IITs who studied years ago. I recently spoke at IIM Ahmedabad in an entrepreneurship forum, and I actually went back to the professor and I said, your students are not up to the grade. My 8th graders would ask more creative questions than the IIM students who reached there. It's all about scores, it's all about, and the whole world has changed, the whole platform has changed. So it's not about an international curriculum or an Indian curriculum. As long as you're best practice, you're great.
Just one question to Mr. Pinto.
People have questions, but I think it's been properly answered that international means, I think Rajeev also very clearly pointed out that global meant high quality standards, and it could be for tribal schools also, right? It could be for medium level schools, but it's really the quality of education that we're looking to improve. Okay, somebody else, a different question, please?
Yeah, I would like to ask something.
And please say your name and maybe where you're from.
Yeah, I'm Danish Patel. I'm coming from Rajkot, Gujarat. Say international schools or progressive learning schools have fees varying from say 1 lakh per annum to 10 lakhs per annum. So there's a huge difference, right? So if I am looking at school which is using pedagogy for progressive methods, alternative methods, can it really be affordable, say down the line within some years?
I think what you're saying and what we all are saying is more or less same. We're still saying that international schools, it is the pedagogy that is different. And yes, what you're saying is right, that international schools are expensive, what you're saying, but even the local curriculum, I mean, if a school does good teaching learning practices, the approaches to teaching learning are right, I'm sure it's not the price that really matters.
Yes, it can be cheap. There are schools that are. You know it's a number game, it's about volumes. There's a school in Bangalore, there's a school in Surat that offers IB curriculum at less than 50,000 annually. And that 50,000 competes with any good national curriculum school, and you know that. So yes, it's possible.
Thank you.
Another question from the audience, please?
Hello.
Yes,
yeah,
okay,
this side.
please, in the back, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, this side, over here. I see him.
Yeah, I'm Jay, and I want to ask something like, we have talked about specially normal students, but are we also talking about any specially aided students? Because since morning, there was a lot of thing happening, and there's nothing on that particular front, because that's a part of percentage of students who are not able to cope up with a normal trend of education.
Yeah, I think that I can talk for my school. We have around 120 students who are having various disabilities, and they can cope with the curriculum. The best part about this curriculum is you can take core, you can take a paper in core, or you can take a paper in advanced. Supposing I'm bad with maths, so I take core maths, or I take advanced maths. Also, there is an opportunity for you to split your subjects. So I have students who are actually having hearing impaired. There's a child with vision problem, there are lots of kids with learning disability. So they do core maths, which is a simple paper, whereas the others do advanced maths. Also, they break their examinations in 2 sessions. So IGCSE Cambridge has 2 sessions of exams. You can do in October, November, and you can take the exam in April, May. So you can break your subjects and still complete your grade 10th and move ahead. Also, there are a lot of facilities. For example, this child with vision, the entire paper is blown up for this child. They get facilities like they get half an hour more, they get reader, they get writer. So they get a lot of support depending on the issues that they have.
Does you have anything for autism also?
Yes, we have 3 autistic students in the school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very often what is found is if you pick up these things very early on and you intervene, a lot can be managed at a very young level. The other focus we have on, as we give to teachers, igniting human greatness in each child. What is this child's potential? What has God left in rather than what has God left out? So just as Rita spoke about Ken Robinson's example of Jillian, each child in our school is asked, what is your passion? And we have an ADHD child who, great performer, acted with Shah Rukh Khan in Ravan. And his whole focus was he's ADHD, he's always going to be fidgety, he's always going to be jumpy, he's never going to do well academically. We know that, but we can find avenues. And these are some of the things that best practice people do. in schools.
Okay, thank you. Any other question? Yes, in the back. Do you have
Hi.
the mic?
My name is Ganesh.
You can just stand up just so we can.
Sure.
Thank you.
My name is Ganesh. I represent an organization called Easy Vidya. I had two questions to ask the panel. Hi, Manjula. One is, if you look at the spirit of, I am not getting into the debate of whether it's national or international. I'm getting to, this is distinct school of thought. The school of thought is allowing the children to make choices, allowing the children to think, and the freedom, the gateway of opportunities to learning is very distinct in international board. When it comes to assessment, I think there is a huge challenge in terms of how do we assess assessment per se. So would international curriculum recommend a subjectivity of teachers coming into while assessing the students? That's question number one. Question number two is, ultimately the teachers who are there in the international schools are products of our national curriculum. And they are the output. So what is one thing which is making the difference? Ultimately, making or breaking a class is to that individual, a teacher who's going to inspire the students to learn. So what is one difference the international schools are making to make that teacher to make a difference in the class? I'm asking this question specifically because I see a lot of panelists who've been handling CBSE schools, now handling international schools.
Okay, so let's take the first question, which is about assessment. Would somebody like to take it up?
If you look at the assessments in the IB diploma program, you can actually present your assessments in the form of role play, in a form of a poem. You can, in the English world literature, you have different forms of assessment. And your second question about what is that is different in the international school teachers is the teacher allows the students to think. The teacher encourages, motivates, inspires the child to think, to question, to investigate, to explore. And the entire teaching learning process is a lot of, we say inquiry-based learning is where the child finds out for himself. And I think that's the most difficult aspect, like you said, for an Indian teacher. But the trainings that are provided for the teachers by the respective boards is what actually changes the teacher's outlook towards teaching and learning. So it's the student, it's the pupil that makes the difference more than the teacher. When he challenges the teacher. I had graduation day very recently, and we had the principal of HR college honoring the students. She said it's hard to have these IB students in the classroom because they keep challenging the teachers. So they are actually trained to challenge the teachers.
If I can just add about the teachers, what you really asked was that the teachers are the same. They've taught in a CBSE program and then they've moved to international schools. And there are a lot of local teachers that teach in IGCSE, Cambridge or IB schools. I think what changes is one, the teaching style, the pedagogical approach, and there is a change in the mindset which schools work very hard and the IB training or the Cambridge training or whatever that curriculum that they're doing. I guess also at the heart of the IB, and which I can talk about that, is that we speak about, and at the core of the IB is the learner profile. So one also believes that teachers are also lifelong learners. So there's this constant philosophy and the mission statement which the schools lives by, and that in turn, when you're teaching the student to be lifelong learners, it's extremely important for the teachers to be lifelong learners as well. And a lot of investment does go in terms of the training, changing the mindset from the schools. Just very quickly, a little bit on the assessment that you also spoke about. There is a range of assessments, both summative and formative assessments. And the way the assessment goes is that the assessment is over a period of 2 years. And it's not just the end of year exam. It's the components could be, and assessments are based a lot on investigation. So let's say if you're doing a history assessment, or sorry, history assessment, or you're writing a historical investigation and you're investigating that issue from a lot of perspectives. If you are doing economics, and it's called internal assessment, the internal assessment, if the student is doing that, The student is going to look at a case study which is just happening from the newspaper, look at those case studies and write his or her own and research that and his or her own interpretation on that. So a lot of assessment, and then that internal assessment then goes to the organization and is moderated and goes to the organization. And then the external assessment is marked by the examiners, and it is against very clear grade descriptors. I think what's extremely important, it's not a mark that's there, it's marked against the grade descriptors, which are very, very clearly specified for each subject.
Okay, I'm going to chime in just for a second because I want to share one of my best kept secrets with you. Okay. There was a wonderful book that was written years ago. The title is the best part of the book. The book really wasn't very good. The title of the book was called, "If You Don't Feed the Teachers, They Eat the Students." And I took that to heart, and one of the suggestions I would like to make, because we do this in our own school, how do you actually train teachers to do these sort of things who have not learned in that environment themselves? It's like a chicken and the egg situation. So here's what we did to overcome that. What I realized was every morning from 8 to 8:30 or 8 to 8:20, depending upon the day, we have morning assembly. And I would see all the teachers out there on the playing ground where everybody assembles, and many of them with their arms folded. And I said that, do we really need all these teachers out there to manage the assembly? And what we did, we have about 85 teachers in our school. So what we did was that every day, half of the teachers from 8 to 8:30 are in teacher training. And there's 2 classes, so there's 20 and 20. So the teachers can opt during the entire week for the classes they want to take, and they have credits that they have to get. So they have to take so many credits per month on different topics that they choose. And in the meantime, what we did is we took some students, 9th class through 12th class, and we made them into like escorts to escort the students back to their classroom for the teachers who are attending the workshop. So it kind of serves a dual purpose. These students get an extra responsibility. They learn how to manage other students and escort them back. In the meantime, the teachers get freed up. It works like a charm. Our teachers are constantly learning, constantly growing, and they're doing these activities. So that's one of my best kept secrets for teacher training, so please do try it. Okay, thank you. Okay. Another question, please. You got, yes, right here. Wait for the microphone, yes.
In CBSE schools, the curriculum up to 10th class is one and the same. But in international schools, I heard that after 8th grade or 8th grade, they are separated according to their interest. Is it correct? Or, for example, medical line or engineering line like that?
I mean, I can talk from an IB perspective.
This will be the last question.
Yeah, okay. The subjects, students have a choice. So there's a subject group. From within those subject groups, students can choose the subjects. And they can choose between 6 to 8 subjects. This is in the middle years program, which is the grade 10. But of course, there's some subjects which they have to do, and they have to choose from each group. The way the groups are structured, it'll be the English group, the humanities group, science and math. So all those subjects are covered, but they can take 6 to 8 subjects. So if someone is interested more so in engineering, could do probably more sciences subjects. So that's something that can be done. Similar is the case with the IB diploma, where it's not stream-wise like we've done the arts, humanities, and commerce. In the last 2 years, you have to choose subjects from the 6 groups. The groups are, again, as I said, language, sorry, I'm trying to say it not in the IB way so that it's understandable for you. This social sciences, math, and if anybody, as I said, wants to do, and there is arts, which is film, theater, visual art, but if somebody wants to study engineering, they can double up on their science. So that option is available, but as we do believe in the holistic education, that each of these groups is really, really necessary for a student to study. I mean, from a very philosophical point of view, we've often thought of making the group 6, which is our visual art, theater, and film, as a mandatory group, but for very pragmatic reasons, we've not been able to do that because universities or entrance does mean that you have to have 2 sciences if you want to do engineering or other areas of study.
They can finish the in eighth
I
grade,
think
student can finish 10th grade maths earlier? That option is there
I
or
think
no?
you're talking about...
No, not in the IB.
Priyamvada, I think he's talking about IGCSE schools. IGCSE schools, that is Cambridge curriculum, they bifurcate in grade 8. They have English, maths, physics, chemistry, bio, and they have English, maths, business eco accounts, or English, maths, arts, psychology, and things like that. In Cambridge schools, there is bifurcation from grade 8. I have seen in many schools in this country.
Okay, I'm sure that you'll have many more questions, and the panelists will probably be here for a little while afterwards. Some of them might be here tomorrow, so please do utilize that opportunity to get your personal questions in and your answers answered. In the meantime, I think we're now going to move to Sir.
I would now like to invite Dr. Ravi Gupta, CEO eLet's Technomedia Private Limited and Chief Editor Digital Learning Magazine, to please give away the speakers' mementos as a small token of thanks from us. Mr. Rajeev Katyal, Country Director India, Global Indian International School. Ms. Vandana Lulla, Director and Principal, Podar International School. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Steve Rudolph, Director, Jiva Education. Thank you, sir, for being such a nice name. Okay, Ms. Rita Wilson, former Chief Executive and Secretary, Council. Executive and Secretary, Council for Indian School Certification Examination and Academic Lead, Developed Schools. Priyamvada Taneja, Development Manager, International Baccalaureate Organization. Lina, Ashar, Founder, Kangaroo Kids Education Limited. Mr. Rayan Pinto, CEO, Rayan Groups of Schools. And Mr. Stephen Rudolph, Director, Jiva Education. Thank you all the panelists and the session's chair. Yeah, and we would be having a group photograph after this.